Okay, welcome to this 16th section, our last one on Malachi. Malachi the prophet. So turn to Malachi, the last book of at least in the Christian canon of the scriptures, it's the last book. In the Hebrew canon, the book of Chronicles is the last book. Chronologically, it's definitely the last book of the Bible, of the Old Testament. Malachi 1:1 says, the oracles of the word of Yahweh to Israel through Malachi. Now, there is no information that I know of that tells us anything about Malachi, who he was, where he came from, his father, his genealogy, we don't know. But it is interesting, and I think this actually has some merit to look at. The name Malachi, and here on the chart, it is the Hebrew word Malachi. Malachi. And the word Malachi actually means my messenger. It comes from the same root word that's used in Malachi 3:1, the messenger. The malak is the Hebrew word for messenger. And actually, we're going to see this word messenger comes up a few times in the book of Malachi. Some have suggested that it was a term given to whoever the prophet is to be God's messenger. I don't know, but I thought that was an interesting take on the name Malachi. Malachi, my messenger. Malachi was the last book written of the Old Testament Christian canon. It would have been written sometime after the exiles had returned to Jerusalem. And I wanted to just go over that briefly here on this chart. The first return came under King Cyrus with Zerubbabel and Yeshua. That was in 536 BC. At that return, that was, remember, 42,000 people. They came and they rebuilt the temple. That's when Zechariah and Haggai were written. That happened in 536 BC. And then you have many, many years later, under Artaxerxes in the 7th year, in 458 BC, Ezra comes with a smaller group, I think it is, to come to Jerusalem. And they bring things to support the building of the temple. That would have been in 458 BC, in the 7th year of Artaxerxes. Now, if you remember, this becomes important, especially when we're going to read something in a little bit. At the end of Ezra, while he was there was a problem with mixed marriages with foreign women. They were married. And so he took care of that then, when he was there. All right? Then, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes is the book of Nehemiah. And there's another return of Jews to Jerusalem under Nehemiah. And if you remember, at this time in 445 BC is when they built the wall of Jerusalem. All right? That was this return of Nehemiah. Now, keep a ribbon or something here in Malachi, because we're coming back to Malachi. But I want to go with you and show you here in Nehemiah. So if you would turn to Nehemiah. 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah. And go to the 13th chapter of Nehemiah. Now I'm going to have to explain this to you because it's kind of hard to read it. But you'll see as we read it what happens here. I think it's possible that chapters 2 through 13, verse 3 of Nehemiah all occurred in that 20th year. When they came back, they rebuilt the wall, remember, in 52 days. They celebrate in the 7th month in these chapters, they celebrate the Feast of Tabernacle. They dedicate the wall of Jerusalem. That's all recorded, and that takes up the majority of what's written in the book of Nehemiah. And in verse 13 it says, chapter 13, verse 1, on that day they read aloud from the book of Moses in the hearing of the people. And there was found written in that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter the assembly of God, because they did not meet the sons of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. However, our God turned the curse into a law. So when they heard the law, this is in that 20th year, 445 BC, at the dedication of the temple, they excluded all foreigners from Israel. This happened under Nehemiah. They excluded the foreigners from Israel. All right? Now, here's where you got to work this a little bit to understand. in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes. Actually, let me go here. I have this here. On this chart. So this was this is when Nehemiah came to build the wall. Nehemiah, actually, if you go to the beginning of Nehemiah, Artaxerxes asked him, how long are you going to be? Fully expecting that he's going to come back. Well, Nehemiah did come back. He came back to Persia in 433 BC, in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes. Nehemiah goes back to Persia to be with Artaxerxes. Now, Nehemiah leaves. I get the feeling that Ezra maybe had passed away by now, because Ezra comes up in that 20th year, but you don't hear from Ezra again. In the meantime, the new rulers in Israel are still there. They have some other governor that's overruling them. They have a high priest, who we're going to see is actually the grandson of Yeshua, who was there. And they start intermingling with the Ammonites and the Moabites again, and bringing things into the temple. And all this happens after Nehemiah leaves. So then a period of time goes by. We don't know. Could it have been 10 years? 20 years? Maybe after Artaxerxes finished his reign in 25 BC, that's when but Nehemiah comes back again. And he finds that things are not good. And that's where we are in Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 4. Like I say, there could be a long time between chapter 13:3 and verse 4. But this is after Nehemiah went back to Persia, and after some time, Nehemiah comes back again. And this is the state of things and how he finds them. Verse 4. Now, prior to this, prior to Nehemiah coming back again after being away, Eliashib the priest, who was appointed over the chambers of the house of God, being related to Tobiah, or allied with Tobiah. Who is Eliashib? If you go back and you look at Nehemiah 12:10, it gives you different genealogies. 12:10, Yeshua, that's the one that came with Zerubbabel back in 520, in 536, 520. Jeshua became the father of Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim became the father of Eliashib. Eliashib became the father of Jehoiada. So this Eliashib at this time is the high priest, running things in the temple. Before Nehemiah returns, it says that he was allied with Tobiah. Now, do you remember who Tobiah was? Tobiah and Sanballat were the guys that stood against Nehemiah in building the wall. These are the guys from the Ammonites and the Moabites and the Arab nations that were trying to stop Israel from building the wall. By this time, when Nehemiah returns, look what's happened. This Eliashib, the high priest, had prepared a large room for him, for Tobiah, the Ammonite, where formerly they put the grain offerings, the frankincense, the utensils, and the tithes of the grain, wine, and oil prescribed for the Levites, the singers, the gatekeepers, and the contributors of the priests. They took the location where they were supposed to bring the tithes and the offerings, and they made a room for Tobias in the court of the temple. Verse 6, but during all this time, Nehemiah says, I was not in Jerusalem. For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I had gone to the king. After some time, however, and I don't know how long this is, I asked leave from the king. And I came to Jerusalem and learned about the evil that Eliashib had done for Tobiah by preparing a room for him in the courts of the house of God. It was very displeasing to me, so I threw all of Tobiah's household goods out of the room. We got all of his stuff out of there. Now, before we read the rest of Nehemiah, I'm just going to give you an overview of some of the topics that we're going to look at in Malachi. And that's why I think Malachi could have been written right during this time. In Malachi, we have the sins of the priests, the corruption of the covenant with Levi, profane sanctuary through marriage to women of foreign gods, and the despising of the tithes. That's what Malachi deals with. This is what Nehemiah is dealing with after he had gone to Persia and he comes back. Look at the rest of the things going on here. Back in Nehemiah, verse 10. I also discovered, Nehemiah says by the time he returned, that the portions of the Levites had not been given them. So the Levites and the singers who performed the service had gone away each to his own field. So I reprimanded the officials and said, why is the house of God forsaken? Then I gathered them together and restored them to their posts. All Judah then brought the tithes of the grain, the wine, and the oil in the storehouses. In charge of the storehouses I appointed Shelemiah the priest, Zadok the scribe, Pedaiah the Levites. Verse 14, remember me for this, O my God, and do not blot out my loyal deeds which I have performed for the house of God and its services. He came back and things were not good with the Levites and the priests and the house of God and the tithes and the offerings. Verse 15 through 22 is they forsook the Sabbath day. But I'd like to go on to verse 23. In those days, this also was happening. I saw that the Jews had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. These are the issues that Ezra dealt with when he came. And now, Nehemiah goes away, he comes back, and they're marrying all the women of these foreign nations again. As for their children, half of they speak the language of Ashdod, and none of them was able to speak the language of Judah, but the language of his own people. So I contended with them and cursed them and struck some of them and pulled out their hair. I don't know what that means, but that can't be good. And made them swear by God, you shall not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons or for yourselves. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin regarding these things? Yet with many nations there was no king like him, and he was loved by his God, and God made him king over Israel. Nevertheless, the foreign women caused even him to sin. Do we hear about you that you have committed all this great evil by acting unfaithfully against our God by marrying foreign women? Verse 28, look at this. Even the son of Jehoiada, the son of Eliashib, in the high priest's children, was son-in-law to Sanballat. Sanballat was the other guy with Tobias. And the son of the high priest is married into the family of Sanballat. This is what Nehemiah came to when he came back. Remember them, verse 28. So I drove him away from me. Remember them, O God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. That's the situation here. Again, I don't know when this was. It was sometime after 430. It could have been 20 years later. I mean, Nehemiah, I don't know how old he was when he first came, but he comes back, and the priests had been defiled, the tithes had been defiled, they were marrying foreign women again, the covenant with Levi had been defiled. Sometime in there, I think, is when Malachi is written. Is Malachi, I don't know who he is, but he was a prophet, a messenger of God, and now let's go to Malachi and see what's in this book. Malachi. Malachi chapter 1, verse 2. I have loved you, says Yahweh, but you say, how have you loved us? Was not Esau Jacob's brother, declares Yahweh? Yet I have loved Jacob, but I have hated Esau. And I have made his mountains a desolation and appointed his inheritance in the jackals of the wilderness. Though Edom says, we have been beaten down, but we will return and build up ruins, thus says Yahweh of hosts, they may build, but I will tear down, and men will call them the wicked territory and the people toward whom Yahweh is indignant forever. Your eyes will see this, and you will say, Yahweh be magnified beyond the border of Israel. So there's a little sin about Edom. Edom were some of these people they weren't supposed to intermarry with from the nations around them. Now, verse 6. We go specifically into these issues with the priests. 6 verse 1, a son honors his father and a servant his master. Then if I am a father, where is my honor? If I am a master, where is my respect, says Yahweh of hosts? O priests, you despise my name. But you say, how have we despised your name? You were presenting, look what they were doing. You were presenting food, defiled food, upon my altar. But you say, how have we defiled you? And that you say, the table of Yahweh is despised. But when you present the blind for sacrifice, is it not evil? You know what they were doing? They were saying, okay, that's a blind calf. Let's offer that one to Yahweh. We'll keep the good ones, but the blind one, we'll offer the blind calf. Why not offer it to your governor? That governor is a term for the Persian governor, which was Nehemiah at one time. But he says, offer it to your governor. Would he be pleased with you? Or would he receive you kindly, says Yahweh of hosts? But now, will you not entreat God's favor that he may be gracious to us with such an offering on your part? Will he receive any kind of kindly, says Yahweh of hosts? Verse 11, from the rising of the sun, even to its setting, my name will be great among the nations. And in every place incense is to be offered to my name, and a grain offering is pure, for my name will be great among the nations. Verse 12, but you're profaning it, in that you have the table of the Lord is defiled for its fruits, its food is to be despised. You also say how tiresome it is, and you disdainfully sniff at it, says Yahweh of hosts. And you bring what is taken by robbery, what is lame or sick, as you bring as the offering. Should I receive that from your hand? But cursed be the swindler who has a male in his flock and vows, but sacrifices a blemished animal to Yahweh. For I am a great king, says Yahweh of hosts, and my name is feared among the nations. They were offering the worst of the flocks, those that were sick, those that were blind. And God says, it's like, really? You're profaning my name. Where's your respect for me? As he says, don't... it's something. Chapter 2. Now, this commandment is for you, O priests. If you do not listen, and you do not take it to heart to give honor to my name, says Yahweh of hosts, then I will send the curse upon you, and I will curse your blessing. Indeed, I have cursed them already because you are not taking it to heart. Behold, I am going to rebuke your offspring, and I will spread refuse on your faces, and refuse of your feasts, and you will be taken away with it. Then you will know that I have sent this commandment to you, that my covenant may continue with Levi, says Yahweh of hosts. Remember in Nehemiah, they had broken the covenant with Levi. My covenant with him was one of life and peace, and I gave them to him as an object of reference. So he revered me and stood in awe of my name. True instruction was in his mouth, and unrighteousness was not found in his lips. He walked with me in peace and uprightness, and he turned many back from iniquity. This was what the priests and the Levites were to do. For the lips, look at this, for the lips of the priest should preserve knowledge, and men should seek instruction from his mouth. For he is the messenger, the Malach of Yahweh of hosts. I think it's interesting that when we get to John the Baptist, he was of the priest line of Zechariah. The priest was supposed to bring people back to God, not take them further away from God. He's supposed to be the messenger, the Malach of God. But as for you, you've turned aside from the way. You've caused many to stumble by the instruction. You have corrupted the covenant of Levi, says Yahweh of hosts. So I have also made you despised and abased before all my people, just as you are not keeping my ways, but are showing partiality in the instruction. Then he goes on to talk about the marriage issue. Do we not all have one Father? Has not one God created us? Why do we deal treacherously each other against his brother, so as to profane the covenant of our fathers? Judah has dealt treacherously, and an abomination has been committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah has profaned the sanctuary of Yahweh, which he loves, and has married the daughter of a foreign god. The son, at the time of Nehemiah, the son of the high priest was married into the family of Sanballat, the foreign gods of the nations there. And it was going on during that time. Let's go down to chapter 3 now. So that's a little bit about the reproof of the Levites. And now chapter 3, after he says, the Levite's supposed to be the messenger of God. God now says, I'm going to send a messenger. I'm going to send my Malach to Israel. Chapter 3, verse 1. Behold, I am going to send my messenger, my Malach, Malachi, and he will clear the way before me. And Yahweh whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple. I mean, not Yahweh, and the Adonai. That was a big mistake there. The Lord Adonai, whom you seek, will suddenly come to his temple. And the messenger, the Malach of the covenant, in whom you delight, behold, he is coming, says Yahweh of hosts. But who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears? For he is like a refiner's fire and like a fuller's soap. He will set as a smelter the purifier of the silver, and he will purify the sons of Levi, and refine them like gold and silver, so that they may present to Yahweh offerings in righteousness. Then the offerings of Judah and Jerusalem will be pleasing to Yahweh, as in the days of old and as in the former years. So, this messenger, we know, has come. According to Jesus, John the Baptist was this messenger, and he was of the tribe of Levi, of the priest line of Zechariah. This messenger came, and Jesus said in Matthew 11, it's on the screen, as these men were going away, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John, and said, what did you go out in the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? But what did you go out to see? A man dressed in soft clothing? Those who wear soft clothing are in king's palaces. But what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and one who is more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it is written, behold, I send my messenger, Malachi, my Malach, ahead of you, who will prepare your way before you. This was John the Baptist. And at the birth, after John was born, this was the prophecy that Zechariah gave over his son. And you, child, talking about John, will be called the prophet of the Most High, for you will go before Yahweh to prepare his ways. You see in this, if you go chapter 3, verse 1, the messenger is going to clear the way, and then the Lord, the Adonai, that's Jesus, the Lord whom you seek, will come to his temple. And that is, he was preparing the way for the coming of the Messiah. I'm not going to read about the tithes, but verses 7 through 15 is about the tithes and the offerings. And they had despised the tithes, and God says, they said, well, how have we robbed you? And he says, in tithes and offerings. They took the storehouse and they gave it to the foreign guy. They didn't even have a place to bring the tithes. They were despising the tithes. He said, bring them back into my storehouse. Kick Tobias out and put my tithes where they're supposed to be, so that the Levites can get paid the way they're supposed to, the way it's supposed to work. And so he brings the tithes back and he reproves them for that. Verse 16 of chapter 3, I love this. Then there were those who feared Yahweh, spoke to one another, and Yahweh gave attention and heard it. And a book of remembrance was written before him for those who fear Yahweh and who esteem his name. They will be mine, says Yahweh of hosts, on the day that I prepare my own possession. I will spare them as a man spares his own son who serves him. So you will distinguish between the righteous and the wicked, between the one who serves God and the one who does not serve God. There's a book of remembrance. It'd be nice to be written in that book as one who worshiped Yahweh, one who gave attention and esteems his name. Then chapter 4. The day of Yahweh is coming. This closes out the Old Testament, chapter 4. For behold, the day is coming, burning like a furnace, and all the arrogant and every evildoer will be chaff. And the day that is coming will set them ablaze, so that it will leave them neither root nor branch. For you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness, healing in his wings, go forth and skip about like calves from the stall. You will tread down the wicked, for they will be ashes under the soles of your feet on the day which I am preparing, says Yahweh of hosts. And then he says in verse 4, I love this, remember the law of Moses, my servant. Remember the word of God. Remember the commandments. Remember the law of Moses, the statutes and ordinances, which I commanded him in Horeb for all Israel. 5, behold, I am going to send you, Elijah the prophet, before the coming of the great and terrible day of Yahweh. And he will restore the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, so that I will not come and smite the land with a curse. Now remember, he told them, you guys better change, else I'm going to come and curse you earlier. Now he says, I'm going to send to straighten things out. I'm going to send Elijah the prophet before the great and notable day of the Lord comes. Who is this guy? According to Jesus, John the Baptist was the first fulfillment of this. Matthew 11:14 on your note up on the screen. Truly I say to you, among those born of women there has not arisen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Yet the one who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. From the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and violent men will take it by force. For all the prophets in the law prophesied until John. And if you will accept it, John himself is Elijah who was to come. And then in Matthew 17, and Jesus and his disciples asked him, why then did the scribes say that Elijah must come first? And he answered and said, Elijah is coming and will restore all things. But I say to you, Elijah already came, and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they wished. So also the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he had spoken to them about John the Baptist, that he was this one to come. And when the angel talked to Zechariah in the temple to tell him that his wife Elizabeth was going to have a child, this is what the angel said to Zechariah about this one that was going to be born. And he will turn many of the sons of Israel back to the Lord their God. It is he who will go as a forerunner before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children, and the disobedient to the attitude of the righteous, so as to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. When we were doing our Berean fellowship, we were asking, what does that mean to turn the hearts of the fathers back to the children? I think this right here in Luke gives you parallel understanding. He will turn many of the sons of Israel back to the Lord their God, right? He will turn the disobedient to the attitude of the righteous. He will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children. They're all using parallel. It's a turning back to God. It's a turning back to his commandments, turning their hearts back to a relationship with God. Malachi uses this quite a bit, this father-son relationship in the book of Malachi. Malachi 1:6, here on the note on the charts. A son honors his father and a servant his master. Then if I'm a father, where's my honor? Malachi 2:10. Do we not all have one Father? Has not God created us? Malachi 3:7. From the days of your fathers you have not turned aside from my statutes and not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you. The father to the children to the father. They will be mine, says Yahweh of hosts, on the day that I prepare my own possession, and I will spare them as a man spares his own son who serves him. So you will again distinguish between the righteous and the wicked, between the one who serves God and the one who does not serve him. You see, this whole thing with obedience, you can see a similar understanding in Deuteronomy. There were two promises in Deuteronomy of prolonged life. Deuteronomy 5:16 says, honor your father and your mother, as Yahweh your God has commanded you, that your days may be prolonged, that it may go well with you in the land. Deuteronomy 5:33. Walk in all the way which Yahweh your God has commanded you, that you may live, that it may be well with you, that you may prolong your days in the land. Part of that honoring of the parents was doing the commandment of Yahweh, that your hearts would be turned. God's desire has always been, Deuteronomy 5:29, oh, that there such a heart in them, that they would fear me and keep my commandments always, that it may be well with them and their sons forever. This is the heart that God has always wanted for his people. A heart of love, reciprocating the love of God. And this is what John the Baptist was to do. Cause people to repent, to turn their hearts from their evil ways and repent. And they came, you read John the Baptist, these people came repenting, baptized in water. They came confessing their sins before him, turning their hearts back to God. That was his ministry. That was the ministry of my messenger, of Malachi. Now, I want to put one more thought to you on this. In Malachi 4, it says, he will restore the hearts of the fathers to the children, the hearts of the children's fathers, so that I will not come and smite the land with a curse. And that closes out the book. There are two prophets in Revelation that we saw, right? Now, there's two prophets that Jesus saw on the Mount of Transfiguration in a vision. Moses and Elijah. There's two prophets that are mentioned right here in the last three verses of Moses, the law of Moses, my servant, and Elijah the prophet that's coming in the day of the Lord. These two guys that are going to come in the end, right before Jesus comes, here it is in Revelation, what they're going to do. God says here in the chart, I will grant authority to my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, 3.5 years, clothed in sackcloth. It says, if anyone wants to harm them, fire flows out of their mouth and devours their enemies. Elijah did that. He called the fire down when they came up against the kings. So if anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this way. These will have power to shut up the sky so the rain will not fall. Elijah did that for 3.5 years. He prayed for it not to rain, and it didn't rain. And they will have power over the waters to turn them to blood. Moses did that. He turned water to blood. And to strike the earth with every plague. Moses did that. These two in the future, I don't know how this all fits, but there's going to be another coming. This is going to be different than John the Baptist, though. This one is the curse on the land. This is the one that's going to bring, before the great and notable day of the Lord, these last final words of the prophets. I don't know. It's an interesting thought, but think about it. That's how the Old Testament closes out. So that is the book of Malachi. And that's how the Old Testament ends, anticipating the coming of the Lord.